Hello and welcome back. So in the last couple of lectures, we have created a global error handling middleware, and we also created a custom error class in our Express application. And using them, we are handling invalid route error, as well as we are also using the custom error class in one of the route handler functions. So if I go to VS Code, from within this default route, whenever we want to handle an error, we are calling the global error handling middleware, and to that we are passing an error object. And we are creating this error object using our custom app error class. In the same way, if I go to hotelsController.js, in there, inside this create hotel route handler function also, from within this catch block, in order to handle any error which has occurred inside this try block, we are creating an instance of this app error class, and we are passing that error instance to the global error handling middleware. So in the same way, if we want to handle errors in other route handler functions, we can do the same thing. We can create an instance of the app error class, and we can pass that instance to the global error handling middleware. So same thing we can do inside this get all route handler function. We can do the same thing inside this get by ID route handler function, inside this update route handler function, and inside this delete route handler function, and also inside these route handler functions. But instead of doing it like this, what I want is, if you see, in all of these route handler functions, we have a catch block, and from within that catch block, we are sending an error response. And if you see, the code which we are writing in order to handle any error is almost same in all of these route handler functions. From the catch block, we are sending an error response to the client. So basically what we are doing here is we are repeating the same code in all of the route handler functions. But instead of doing it like this, what I want is I want to create a function, and that function should be responsible for handling any error which might occur in these route handler functions. Okay, so basically I want to get rid of this catch block from each of the route handler functions. And if any error occurs in any one of these route handler functions, I want to create a generic function which will handle any error which might occur in any of these route handler functions. Now, how are we going to achieve that? For that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function. So let me create a function here, and let me call it as catchAsync. Now, why I'm calling this function as catchAsync? Because this function is going to handle any error which can occur inside an async function. If you see, all these route handler functions are async functions. So if any error occurs inside any one of these route handler functions, and these are async functions, we want to handle that error inside this catchAsync function. And to this catchAsync function, we are going to pass a function as an argument. So I'm simply going to call this parameter as func, or maybe I can also call it as handler. So let me actually call it as handler. It will give it more meaningful name. Okay, so this handler, it is going to receive one of the route handler functions as its value. And from within this catch async function, we are going to call that route handler function. So here I'm going to call this handler function like this. Okay, so a function definition will be assigned to this handler parameter, and on that function definition, when we are using a set of parentheses, that function will be executed. And also when we are calling one of these handler functions, if you see, all of these handler functions are going to take a request object and a response object. And here, since these are middlewares, I'm also going to specify the next parameter for each of them. And we are going to use this next parameter in order to call the global error handling middleware. So let me go ahead and let me specify that for all of these route handler functions. Okay, let's do it for these route handler functions also. All right, so all of these route handler functions are expecting a value for request parameter, response parameter, and next parameter. So here we are going to pass the value for request parameter, response parameter, and the next parameter. Now from where we are going to get this request, response, and next, that we will understand in a bit. But remember that when we are executing one of these route handler functions, so here let's take an example of this create route handler function. So from within this catchAsync, basically we are going to pass this function as an argument to this catchAsync function. So here, let me actually show you that. Here I'm calling this catchAsync function, and to this catchAsync function as a parameter, I'm passing this route handler function like this. Okay, so here I'm passing a function definition. This function definition will be assigned to this handler parameter. And then inside this function, we are calling that function. Now, when this function is called, if there is no error, in that case, a hotel document will be created and we are sending a response from that function. But if some error occurs, remember that these are async functions, so they are going to return a promise. If this function has executed successfully without any error, in that case, this async function is going to return a resolved promise. But if some error has occurred, in that case, this async function will return a rejected promise. Now, currently it will not return a rejected promise because we are handling any error which might occur inside this function using this catch block. But from here, I'm going to remove this catch block. And let's also remove this try block. Okay. So now, if the code inside this function is executed successfully, in that case, there will be no error. And in that case, a resolved promise will be returned by this function. In that case, we don't want to do anything. But in case, if some error has occurred inside this function, for example, while creating the hotel document, let's say some validation failed. And when a validation will fail, this function is going to throw an error, a Mongoose validation error. So when that error will be thrown, since we do not have any catch block now inside this function, that error will not be handled inside this function. And the error will propagate to this function from where we are calling it. And here also, we will receive that error. So in that case, this async function is basically going to return a rejected promise with the error which has occurred. And here we can handle that error by using the catch block. So we know that on a promise we have two methods. We have then method to handle a resolved promise, and we have catch method to handle a rejected promise. So inside this function, if any error occurs, it is going to return a rejected promise, and that rejected promise we are handling by calling this catch method on that rejected promise. And this catch method is going to receive a callback function. That callback function will receive an error object. And what we want to do from within this callback function is we simply want to call the global error handling middleware. And for that, I'm using this next function. And to that, I'm going to pass the error object. So we have learned that when we call next function with a parameter, it skips all the middleware in the stack and it directly calls the global error handling middleware. So when we are executing this function, in this example, this handler will point to this route handler function. So while executing this function, if any error has occurred, in that case, this async function is going to return a rejected promise. That rejected promise we are handling by using this catch method. And from within this catch method, we are simply calling the global error handling middleware. Now here, this implementation is not going to work. Why? Because first of all, here to this create, we are assigning the result of this catch async function. And from within this catch async function, we are not returning anything. So in that case, undefined will be returned. And that undefined, we are passing as a route handler function here. So here to this post method, instead of passing a function, undefined will be passed. And in that case, in our Express application, we will have an error. And even if I return something from here, let's say this handler function has executed successfully, which it will not, and I'll tell you why in a bit. But let's say this handler function has executed successfully. In that case, from within this handler function also, from within this route handler function also, we are not returning anything, right? From here, if everything goes well, we are sending a response to the client, but we are not returning any value from within this function. So in that case also, this route handler function is going to return undefined, and that undefined will be returned from this catch async function. And to this create method, we are assigning the result of calling this catch async function. So this create will be assigned with undefined, and in that case also here to this post method we are passing undefined as a route handler function, and in that case also we will get an error. And another problem is inside this function there is no way of passing a value for this request parameter, this response parameter, and this next parameter. So all of these will be undefined. Why? Because when we pass a route handler function to a route, like here, like let's take an example of this get all route handler function. So when I'm passing it as a route handler function to this get method, Express will take care of passing the value for the request object, the response object, and the next parameter. So in this case, Express will pass value for these parameters. But here in this case, since we are not assigning any function as the route handler function, Express will not be able to pass the request, response, and next. Right. So from here, what we need to do is from within this function, we need to return a function. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a function, and inside that function, I will wrap this code. So now when we are calling this catchAsync function, it is going to return us this function, and this function will be passed as the route handler function. And since that function is passed as the route handler function, this function will receive a request object, a response object, and the next parameter, a value for the next parameter. And now that request, response, and next we can pass to this handler function. In our example, currently this handler function is pointing to this async function. So now this request, response, and next will receive a value. I hope this point is clear. And in this way, we have created a function which will handle any error which might occur inside an async function. Now let's understand how this will work. So here what will happen is when a request will come to this endpoint, when a post request comes to create a new hotel document, this create method is assigned with this function. Okay, so this function is going to receive a value for the request parameter, response parameter, and the next parameter. And here this function will not get executed immediately. We are simply returning this function, and that function we are passing as the route handler function. Now when a post request will come to hotels resource, then that function will be executed. Basically, then this function will be executed. And from within this function, we are calling the handler function. And this handler function is currently pointing to this async function. That means this async function will be called. And when this async function will be called, it will try to create a new hotel document. If the hotel document is created successfully in the MongoDB database, this response will be returned to the client. But let's say if some error occurred while creating that document, let's say maybe the validation failed. In that case, at this line, an error will be thrown and this code will never execute. So when an error will be thrown, this function, this async function, it will be exited, and we are calling this function from within this function which we have passed as a route handler function. So inside this function, we are going to receive that error which has occurred, and that error will be handled by this catch block. And how this catch block is handling that error? By calling the global error handling middleware. So now, in case an error has occurred, the control will reach to the global error handling middleware. In this case, it will come to this function. And then this function is going to handle that error by sending this response where we will have the status and the error message. Let's quickly test this. Let's save the changes here. Let's go to Postman. And from here, let's try to create a new hotel document. And for that, what I'll do is I'll try to create a hotel document without specifying a name for the hotel. If I send this request, you see, we have received this response, internal server error. So some error has occurred. and the validation has failed, and you will see that the status code is 500. Now, why the status code is 500? First of all, you will see that a validation error has occurred on the name field. It says hotel name is required. Since we are not specifying the hotel name, we have set it as empty string. That's why we have this error, and the status is error instead of fail, and the status code is 500. Now, why is that? That's because in our global error handling middleware, we are saying that if the status code is not present on the error object, and since this error is thrown by Mongoose, on that error we will not have a status code property by default. Okay, so in that case, it is going to use this default value, which is 500, and on that Mongoose error, since the validation error is thrown by Mongoose, on that error we will also not have this status property. And in that case, this default status value is set. And that's why in Postman, status is error and status code is 500. But as you can see that this function, this async error handler function which we have created here, it is able to handle any error which occurs inside this async function. Okay. And in this way, we have get rid of the catch block also. So same thing we can do for other route handler functions. But before that, let me also show you that if everything goes well inside this async function, then that functionality will also work. So for example, if I create a new hotel document with a name, let's say test hotel 3, and if I send the request, in this case, the hotel document should be created successfully with a 201 created response. But if some error occurs, in that case, that error will be thrown from within this async function, and that will be handled by this catchAsync function. Now we are going to do the same thing for all of these route handler functions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass all these route handler functions to this catchAsync function. So let's do that. Same thing I'll do here and here. And then let's also do it for these async functions. Okay, and now from within these functions, we can go ahead and we can remove the try block and we can remove the catch block. And let's do this in all other functions. Let's remove the try block and let's remove the catch block, because now the error will be handled by the catch async function. Here also, I'm going to remove the catch block and the try block. Then in this update also, I'm going to remove the try block and I'm going to remove this catch block. Let's do the same thing for get by ID. From here also, I'll remove the try block and the catch block. We have already done it in create route handler function. Let's also do it in get all route handler function. So from here, I'm going to remove this try block and this catch block. Okay. So now, if an error occurs in any of these async function, that error will be handled by this catch async function. And remember that this catch async function will only be able to handle an error which occurs inside an async function. If we pass a normal function to this catch async, it will not work inside this. Why? Because here we are expecting a promise to be returned, and only an async function can return us a promise. And if that promise is rejected, then we are handling it using this catch block. But if we pass a regular function to this catch async, in that case, a regular function is not going to return us a promise. A non-async function, it is not going to return us a promise. And that's why on the result of that, we cannot call this catch method. So this catch async function will only be able to handle any error which occurs inside an async function. And here what we are doing is we are passing these route handler functions in the controller file. But what I could have also done is in the router file, when I'm passing these functions as a route handler function, at that time also I could have gone and I could have called catchAsync, something like this. In that case, you will also have to export this catchAsync function from this controller file and import it in this file. So this is also something which we can do, and it will work in the same way. But here I'm not doing it in this way because while using this catchAsync, we need to make sure that the function which we are passing to it is an async function. And here we do not have any way of knowing that the function which we are passing here to catchAsync, it is an async function or not. So either we will have to remember that the function which we are passing, it is an async function, or we will have to check the controller to check if for that function we are using this async keyword or not. So to avoid all that, I am not using this catchAsync function here. Instead, I'm directly using it in the controller. Okay, so both are going to work in the same way. Now let's quickly test one more time to check everything is working as expected. So let me go back to Postman, and now first of all let me save this request and I'll close this. I'm also going to close this tab, and now let's try to update a hotel. So let's say I want to update a hotel, maybe this hotel, and I want to set its cheapest price to 90. Now, previously we have written a logic where we are not allowing the value of the cheapest price less than 100. So here, if I try to update this hotel document, and there if I try to update the cheapest price to 90, which is less than 100, a validation error will be thrown. And that validation error will be thrown inside this update route handler function. So in that case, the catchAsync function should handle that error by calling the global error handling middleware. You see, here that error has been handled by the catchAsync method, and it called the global error handling middleware, and we can see that error response. We can see that the status is error and the error message is price of a hotel cannot be less than 100. So for update also it is working as expected, and it will work for other route handlers as well. Now the last thing which I'm going to do is I'm going to move this function inside its own file. So I'm going to cut it from here, and in the utilities folder I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it as catcherror.js. And from within this file I'm going to export a function. So I'll say module.exports, and I'm going to export this catchAsync function. Now here I don't need to provide a name for that. I'm simply going to export it. But wherever I want to use this function, there we will have to import this function. So I'm currently using it in the hotelsController.js. So there at the top, I'm going to create a variable. Let's call it as catchAsync because that's the name we are using at these places. So I'm going to call it catchAsync, and here I'm going to require that function. So for that we are using this require function, and here let's specify the path of the file inside which we have created it. So from the current directory, we need to move one directory up. There we need to go to this utilities folder, and in that utilities folder we have catcherror.js file from where we are exporting that catcherror function. And actually I wanted to call it as catchAsync. So let me rename it actually, and I'm going to call it as catchAsync. Okay, so here I want to use catchAsync. With this, let's save the changes and let's test it one more time. So again, if I send this request, since the price is less than 100, we should get an error response. We are getting it. But if I set the price to, let's say, 190, and now if I send the request, the hotel document should be updated. You see, the hotel document is updated, and there the cheapest price is set to 190. So everything is working as expected. But here, now we are using this catchAsync function to handle any error which might occur inside an async function. And when we are doing this, we have reduced the number of lines of code which we have inside each of these route handler functions. You see, we have got rid of the try and catch block, and we have also got rid of any repetitive code which we were writing inside the catch block, and it has also made these functions a little bit leaner. Right. And this is the advantage of using an async error handler function. So this is all I wanted to cover in this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.